Today on American Outlaw, I am in Idaho with Ken Hackathorn, who I have literally followed my entire life. So I am 45 years old this year, and I did not know about Gunsite or Jeff Cooper. Now, mind you, I came up through police training at a different time, and we were lucky, and we had a gentleman named Sam Hattie that was a FBI SWAT guy, and so our training was kind of done in house for most of my training, and the training world wasn't. I was a young cop, so it wasn't a, a, a big thing. And also, we didn't have the internet. We didn't even have computers. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have any of that stuff. We hand wrote out our police reports. But I was with my friend James Yeager. And so this is one of the things I did. I came here specifically because James Yeager, Nate, and I had said we were going to ride our motorcycles up 3 years ago to see Ken Hackathorn, sit down and do videos with him. And I told, I said, look, if I don't do this, I'm just going to keep putting it off. So 3 years later, I finally called Ken. He said, come up here. And so I thought I would ask him some questions the that will be like evergreen content that will always be here as you guys start learning about the history of why we're here more. And so Ken, thanks for coming on. The one thing I want to know though is until I went to Gunsite in 2022, I took their 250 class. I shot an e-ticket with a Nighthawk 1911, which was cool. I didn't even know what an e-ticket was, and I really didn't know anything about it. I knew it was a big deal to Jaeger, and so you were, I guess, one of the first instructors at Gunsite. And so tell us about Jeff Cooper, Gunsite, and what he did and meant to the shooting world.
Jeff Cooper, as you know, was an interesting guy. Grew up in California, never had any law enforcement background. Went through a Marine ROTC program, World War II, became a Marine officer, served through World War II. Actually, um, was in the Marine Corps Reserve after World War II. Got called up for Korea. Did what was best described as clandestine work, actually in conjunction, because in the Korean War era, the Army hadn't didn't have any special operations to speak of. The Marine Corps did most of the CIA's hands-on work, kind of. So he got selected for that. After Korea, he stayed and worked for the agency for a while. Most people don't know that he was actually an agency employee. Eventually went back to California, where his family was from. Raised his kids there. His wife's family owned a house, a ski resort up at Big Bear Lake, up in a ski lot. And as her family let them, Jeff and Janelle's wife, live there and raise their kids. And Jeff was in a motorsport racing. He had an MGB, and he was racing and at that. Trying to think what the name of the track. Pretty well known racetrack in in the LA area. It'll come to me. But anyway, and one of the guys that was racing and was into the sports car racing thing was a guy named Bob Peterson, who started a magazine called Car and Track and Motor Trend. And in about 1956, 58, he said, somebody said, we ought to do a gun magazine. Because up to that time, American Rifleman was about the only thing that, and like Field and Stream and stuff. I said, okay, I'm going to start a gun magazine. Called it Guns and Ammo. And they said, well, okay, we've got Tom Sciotos who will do the hunting articles. We got this guy that'll do the hunting rifle articles. We got a guy that'll talk about shotguns. We need a handgun guy. So one of the things that Robert Peterson looking for is this handgun editor. Jeff Cooper was like, hey, this young Marine that races MGBs is into guns and handguns. He'd make great for a handgun editor. So that's how he got his launch into the gun world and notoriety. That built up over the years. Because remember, gun magazines was the sole source of information back then. So Jeff got a following, and people, and he was into this combat shooting thing, which he kind of pioneered as far as, because back then you had bullseye shooting, bullseye shooting, you had PPC, police shooting, and then you had quick draw. So what Jeff came up with, became combat shooting, was new. The world had never seen it, and he had pioneered it when he started the Southwest Pistol League. So momentum picked up. He became more and more famous. He started traveling because of his notoriety, teaching classes here and there. He started IPSC. He formed Gunsite as a training thing. And a lot of people at the time thought, man, he's building a place in the middle of nowhere. Nobody's going to come to a private shooting school. And you got to remember, time frame, the survivalist movement kicked in about that time. Suddenly, people were all worried about the Russians parachuting in.
What time frame was that?
This would be right around about 1975, 76 time frame. I mean, it's about the same time as the Columbia Conference. Survivalist movement was huge. That was back, everybody had an FAL or an M1A or an HK91. Everybody was into that stuff. And suddenly going to Gunsite and getting training for what was perceived to be the great kahuna, the colonel, showing you how to fight with firearms was a pretty attractive thing. Nobody else in America had ever done that.
I didn't know this until I had talked to Joe Fox. And I knew it had started in the 70s. I didn't know when. But survivalist movement is very interesting. We might dig into it, but it is what you would today call a prepper.
Yep.
It's the prepper movement. But the survivalist movement, and then Ruby Ridge and Timothy McVeigh and Waco is like the wildest thing you'll ever go down the line and study. But anyway, go back.
Yeah, but that was a contributing factor. I think had that mindset in America not been present, Gunsite might not have been successful. Started kind of slow. Interesting, Jeff was never concerned about making a lot of money. He was never as concerned with Gunsite, which may have been a little naive on his behalf. But as it turned out, it grew, it got more popular. The gun magazine started covering it. And since he wrote for Guns and Ammo, they made sure he got a lot of exposure. And the momentum built, and pretty soon, over a span of years, Gunsite from, say, 78 up until Jeff Cooper sold it, it became, that was it. I mean, that if you want in the private sector, you wanted to learn, that's the place you went. And a lot of police officers went because, you face it, in 1980, there was still a huge amount of police departments in America that were still qualified shooting at bullseye targets one-handed. I mean, law enforcement training didn't move very quickly. And Cooper was he was the new card, the wild card, if you will. The stuff he was preaching, drawing from a holster, shooting on the move, multiple targets, double taps, quick reload, all that stuff was, nobody had ever seen that before. That was all new stuff. And consequently, he had a shoot house, probably one of the first private sector shoot houses. Some shoot houses existed, not many back then, but there were some agencies that had them and some military facilities, but not many. For him to have one where you could go, or somebody was not in a government payroll and learn to negotiate a shoot house, that was a big deal. Bottom line is, Jeff's approach, it caught on. People were like, hey, I dig this. And man, people flocked to it to the point where I think the 1911 pistol is so popular in America today. There's more of them being made, more of them been sold than any time in history because of Jeff Cooper. In Jeff Cooper's mind, the ultimate sidearm was a 1911 45 caliber pistol. And he was even a proponent of it. That's what he perpetuated. And you probably, if you look back, suddenly demand for 1911. So America was a revolver society back then. Suddenly the 1911 45 was a gun everybody wanted. Now, sadly, the quality of the guns that were being sold by, say, Colt and later Springfield Armory weren't always the best quality as far as functional reliability. But the bottom line, the 1911 took off. Yeah, and it's kind of dropped off the map a little bit and then came back. Still very popular, has a loyal following. But Cooper, again, lit the fuse. And of course, he expanded to rifle training. He created the concept of the scout rifle, added rifle training to the thing, shotgun training. He expanded the scope to the point where Gunsite grew and grew and grew. They had to increase the staff. They would do double classes. They would have, 2 classes of 24 students at a time going through. Their schedule increased. They normally started in the spring, usually right around April, and then stopped about the 1st of December, because if you've been there in the wintertime, not many people are interested in cold weather. So they ran it kind of a seasonal thing. Jeff Cooper's fame increased. He wrote a number of books. He was a bigger than life character. He was an easy guy to get, shall we say, he was charismatic enough in the way he presented himself that a lot of people said, that's the guy I want to be like. And I think there's a lot of males, young males, that are always looking for a father like, or somewhat of a leader that they want to structure themselves after. And you saw it to a large degree at with James Yeager. I mean, there were people that came there because he was not a necessarily in your face guy. He was a no bullshit guy, and he told you the way it was, and he didn't baby you. And you had people that were like, "This is the guy I want to pay attention to. This is the guy I want to follow." And as you know, huge amount of his students came back again and again and again. Gunsite was the same way, to the point where they started building 250 and then 299 and 350. I mean, it's like, what do we do? How do we get them to come back and get their money again? Well, you add another level of the class, and that's a marketing tool. But Cooper was bigger than life, and rarely compromised his values. He was so rigid that in many ways he was so locked into his dogma. I remember one time I pointed out something that in a training program. I remember I know what it was, but I won't go into it now. Where I said, Jeff, this is wrong. This is not a good. You shouldn't be teaching it. You know what he said? Yeah, I know. And I was kind of like, well, why don't you change it? He said, because if I change that, then people will question everything in my dogma. I don't think that was the approach, but he felt that was the way it was. In other words, I've written the Bible. I'm not going to change the scripture because people will question the other parts of the scripture. And that's about the time I got disillusioned enough, or whatever, that I chose to part company. Um, and then I went on my own, so to speak. I told you kind of how that thing went. And but I still think if you took only one class in the world and you went to Gunsite and took a 250, you leave Gunsite and you saw it when you're there. You went because you were already pretty dialed in, and you, like you say, you got an e-ticket. You saw people that showed up there that probably had never fired a gun before they got there. And if you look at where they were when they left versus where they came, pretty impressive. Most of those people, if faced with a real world encounter, as far as the combat marksmanship part of it, they do just fine. In many ways, that's what James Yeager did. He did a meat and potatoes course that when you left his school or took his class, as far as being able to protect yourself with a gun, you're probably good enough.
If you haven't been to Gunsite, they've got a very nice facility, very nice buildings, place to eat lunch, gunsmith shop, pro room. I don't know of any other school that has all of that. I don't. Is there?
No. Here's what I say, and you're dialing on this key. Gunsite is the Mecca of gun guys. You may say, I don't need the training, I don't need the skill, I'm good enough. Everybody, at least one time, should go to Gunsite.
I really believe that.
Yeah.
I think you should go to Gunsite. I really do. And I also think I understand we talked about the 2 day condensed classes and how so many people do it. Um, the one thing that I got out of it, because I watched a lot of people who had never touched a gun, but 5 days of 8 hours, 10-hour days of a gun, I think even at the end of that makes you better than 2 days because you're just more
You
familiar with it.
you get more indoctrinated.
Yep.
And the bottom line is, I say, if you have an opportunity to go, go. You'll enjoy it. It's a good. Yeah, I mean, let's face it. They've had what, half a century to perfect it. And I mean, the 250 courts is the. And I tell people, don't worry about whether you're a good shooter or a bad shooter. Go. You will learn. You'll enjoy yourself. And when you leave, you can say, I've. It sounds kind of corny, but I'm a Gunsite graduate. You're
Yeah.
now part of a pretty special group of people. And like I say, I would never tell anybody not to go. They've got great instructors. Their approach and their pitch that they put out is super valid. There's no downside to going to Gunsite. Not inexpensive, but most things of value in life are not cheap.
One of the things about Gunsite is I still have friends that I made at Gunsite
Absolutely.
that I still stay in contact with, 3 or 4 years later. So I think that's one thing that people miss in training. I hear all of these people now, I'm self-taught. And we can make a whole hour-long video on self-taught, but the camaraderie that you get from hanging out with the people and the diversity and seeing where, and then the network that comes out of that is far more than you would have got staying in your hometown watching YouTube and practicing.
Oh, absolutely. I can remember when I first started going out there, the diversity of people in that class, those classes, back then there was only one, and there were only 24 people, and you would have everything from guys that were, I mean, politicians, bank presidents, electricians, you know, uh, prospectors. I mean, law enforcement. It was an unbelievable variety. I mean, everything from women in the classes that were a nurse or a homemaker. I mean, to say okay, these people are all right wing extremists, hardly the case. They spanned a group of people that was kind of a cross section of American society. They were there all for the same reason. They felt they had a need or reason to learn these skills. And when you see somebody that shows up that's never fired a gun or has very little experience or is terrified of them, and you see that transformation, you can almost see their personality take on this kind of like, hey, I'm I'm in charge of my life now. I have the ability to not be a victim. I have the ability to take care of myself. That's that may not be something for you or me that was a big thing, but I saw it in students, and I'm sure you did when you were there too.
Sure. And I'll say this, and you can go to Gunsite having never touched a gun and spend 5 days there at 250. And at the end of that, you will be as good as the favorite YouTuber that you watch.
Yeah.
You really will be.